Pitt, Duke, and North Carolina owning the Coastal. As Georgia Tech hopes to be a spoiler, Clemson and Florida State don't trip up on your way to the showdown. This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, bringing in the best bloggers in the conference. So this week we've got honors going to Jim Hammond of Cardiac Hill and his Pitt Panthers at 5-1, undefeated in the ACC. Joey Weaver on the other side of the coin, 0-4 Georgia Tech. Yes, from the Rumble seat. And also Dan Rubin, BC Interruption, repping another winless team in the ACC, Boston College. So, Jim, this is pretty obvious here. You have the seat of honor here. You can start us out. Anything that caught your eye last week, in addition to the Pitt win, head-to-head against Georgia Tech? That was a game that, despite the records, the Panthers, a slight underdog, pulled off a close win, obviously a very meaningful win against a team that's down, but still very capable, defending division champion. Uh-oh, I think we lost Jim. We'll have Joey pick us up on the Georgia Tech Pitt game. Your thoughts on that one, Joey?
Yeah, so obviously Georgia Tech's struggles continue. It was very much in line with what happened against Duke and North Carolina for Georgia Tech, where they just needed to make one more play and they couldn't. Pitt did a nice job on offense of moving the ball. They were getting the ball to Tyler Boyd in double and triple coverage, and that was something that Coach Johnson talked about on his radio show on Monday, was that they were putting 2 and 3 guys on any given play towards Tyler Boyd, and he was still getting the ball. I think he had 8 catches for 60-some yards and a couple of touchdowns. So just a pretty average Tyler Boyd output there for you. But Georgia Tech couldn't get any pressure on the quarterback at all. Defense really did not come to play. The offense was impressive. Pitt's defense was ranked top 10 in the country in rushing defense coming in, and Georgia Tech went for nearly 400 yards on the ground against them. So certainly got to be happy about that. They seem to be finding a little bit of something through the passing game, which is encouraging, but the pass protection is still an absolute fiasco for Georgia Tech. But Pitt, a very solid football team, really good defense, and I think they've bounced back really nicely ever since losing James Conner. We were talking a little bit before the show that Jim was saying that he would have never thought that Pitt in a million years would be where they are right now at the moment that Conner went down, but here they are, and the road ahead looks pretty good for them. So they got as good a shot as anybody at winning the Coastal at this point. And meanwhile, Georgia Tech is still looking for that first conference win, as here we are getting towards Halloween. And if you'd told me that a couple of months ago, I would have thought you were crazy. So just another typical year of ACC football.
And with Florida State coming up, it doesn't look too hopeful.
Yep, doesn't get any easier from here for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I guess I'll make this comment while Jim's not on the line with us. I have thought it a bit strange over the past couple of years that 2 of the best playmakers in college football, James Conner and Tyler Boyd, playing for the Pitt Panthers. Jim, are you with us?
I am.
You obviously, being a Pitt fan, cannot stand the prosperity. So I set you up nicely. I handed it off to you, and wow, you were nowhere to be seen. Just couldn't handle the prosperity. But we definitely want your take on the Georgia Tech game last week.
Yeah, going into that game, many Pitt fans expected that to be the toughest game, even going into the season, going in to play the defending Coastal champions, triple option team. Just playing Georgia Tech, it's just an uncomfortable situation playing against a triple option. And Georgia Tech made it uncomfortable. They played very well on offense. They really torched the Pitt defense, which has been so good this year.
Uh-oh. That means it's time for Dan to take over. Dan, we know that you have the stat of the week for us, and if we can get that sponsored, that would be great. But it's our stat of the week, Dan. If you can bring that to us right now. Clemson, BC last week, 34-17 game, but it kind of provides a little bit better perspective when we know what about the Boston College offense.
Well, there are two stats. I'll give you the stat of the week, and then I'll give you the secondary stat of the week. The stat of the week is if you combine the Boston College stat output, the offense's output, against all FBS opponents, so we exclude Maine and we exclude Howard, Boston College would have only outscored Clemson 41-34. They scored 41 points this year against the FBS, and it's come through 2 games. They scored 17 against Northern Illinois, and they scored 17 against Clemson. They've been shut out twice. They scored 7 against Duke. You get 41 points against FBS opponents compared to the 34 that Clemson scored against Boston College. Now, if you take the main game into the equation, Boston College is getting outscored by the Howard game. So they get 41 points. You add 24 to it, you get 65. The Howard game is outscoring the rest of the season 76-65. Ladies and gentlemen, your Boston College offense.
Math courtesy the Boston College football team. It makes math fun, I guess.
It makes it something. It's been it makes it something. I mean, I'm
fun for Boston College fans, but for the rest of us, it's some fun facts to chew on here. So, Joey, I guess that you probably took in the Louisville-Florida State game and have a handle on what happened there. I saw most of the first half into the third quarter. Close game, looked similar to what Florida State's done against some teams that not necessarily were inferior teams by a ton, and especially this Louisville team looks very strong in the front seven, obviously has the quarterback in place that we expect big things out of in the future. But your take on Louisville and Florida State?
Yeah, that game was close for a while. Like you said, I mean, it went after halftime. I think at halftime it was like Louisville actually led 7-6, which that would have surprised me too if you told me that before the game, that they would have gone to Doak Campbell and hold Florida State to 6 first half points and do that. But, that's what they're at right now. I mean, they kind of fell apart after a while. I think the defense might have gotten a little gassed and started letting up some bigger plays to Dalvin Cook and somehow failed to force a turnover on Everett Golson, who still has not turned the ball over on the year, which, again, things that we would have never expected after all those interceptions he had at Notre Dame. And that Florida State team kind of came around and gained a lot of momentum towards the end of that game and made it a big win. And that's something I'm interested to see if they can carry forward into the Georgia Tech game this week, which, honestly, as down as Georgia Tech is, that might be a little tougher of a game than Florida State is expecting. It's going to be a crazy environment, and I'm really interested to see kind of what comes out of that game for both teams.
Yeah, the odds makers usually know what they're doing, and when you look at that on the surface, you see a top 10 team versus a Georgia Tech team that's winless in the ACC at 0-4, but the spread's only like 5.5 points. So I think that clues us into Florida State struggling on offense. Georgia Tech still has obvious talent on the field. So before we try to dive into the rest of the Coastal Division and handicap that, Dan, does it come down to Clemson, Florida State, and is that the end of the season in the Atlantic? It certainly looks like that.
Yeah, the Atlantic Division's Clemson and Florida State show. I thought before the season that somebody would cost somebody the division. I still think that's the case. I don't think Florida State is as good as their record would indicate, or the fact that they haven't lost a regular season game in about 3 years. I just don't think they're that good. I think it's a case where the rest of the ACC is playing that poor. It's Clemson's show to lose. It's their division, and then after that, you got 5 teams that it's who wants it least. It's going to be Bull-Mageddon come down the end of this with a whole bunch of sub 500 teams and 500 teams. How they figure out who goes where for the bowl berths is really going to be interesting, because these teams, most of them still have to play each other. And I have a feeling it's going to be like cannibalism all over the place with teams beating other teams. And somebody's still going to cost someone a bowl berth. The question is where and with who.
So, Dan, most of the teams are 3 games into this. Any surprises for you? We're halfway through the season, not quite halfway through the conference season. Anything stand out to you that you didn't expect?
Louisville being 1-2 is pretty shocker for me. I really thought Louisville was going to be a lot better than they are. When you go back over their record, the fact that they're 2-4, bowl eligibility might be a problem for them when you look down the rest of their season, because they conceivably could lose 3 games. They're playing a Boston College team that has a very, very good defense, even though it got lit up a little bit by Clemson. That's still Clemson, and the defense is still number 1 in the nation. You got Syracuse, you've got Virginia on there. Somebody's going to lay an egg. You got Pittsburgh. Louisville could lay a couple of them, and I'd have thought they would finish third in the division, challenge Clemson or Florida State. That's not what happened. Instead, it's a runaway. Louisville could still finish third in the division, but I don't think there's anybody that's looking at them and thinking that they're a major player, which I really thought with that defense they were going to be just a solid program this year, and there isn't one. I mean, everyone in that division is trying to lose as many games as possible, I feel like.
Do you think Clemson-Florida State's a coin flip, and you're going to have to wait until practically kickoff to pull the trigger on a pick, or do you think one of these two teams is decidedly better than the other?
I think Clemson's running away with it, and I think Clemson is going to beat Florida State. It's at home. It's sandwiched right at the right time. Clemson gets Miami this weekend. Next weekend they go up to NC State. It's a little bit of an easier schedule for them. It lends nicely for them to build up to that Florida State game, and then they get a couple of easier games before they have to play South Carolina. So I think Clemson could run the table very easily. They are outstanding, and I think they're going to beat Florida State. I think they're going to go to the ACC championship game. I don't know that they can beat Pittsburgh or Duke or whoever winds up coming out of the Coastal, but I think going into that ACC championship game, they're going to easily win the Atlantic Division and maybe get a little bit of a challenge from FSU, but Clemson is by far the best team coming out of that division this year.
I'm still trying to process that statement, Dan. You don't know if Clemson can beat whoever comes out of the Coastal.
Yeah, that welcome to the ACC football.
Okay.
That's just what I can toss it up to. They could run the table, wind up in the playoff, or they're not losing a game in the Atlantic Division or losing a game on their regular season schedule. But I wouldn't put it past them to go to I hope Dabo doesn't watch this. They're going to pull a Clemson somewhere along the line. You just hope it doesn't kill their season.
Joey, this is the most fun division to try to handicap in college football, this Coastal Division. And it was a lot of fun for you to handicap about this time last year when your team got off to about a 3-1 start in the division. But your team's pretty much aside. It's still going to be just a free-for-all between, we talked about Pitt, Duke, and North Carolina being undefeated. Still some other teams, including Miami, with one loss. Can you try to get a handle on this one?
Yeah, see, that's the thing, is that as much as Georgia Tech has struggled, they talk about the combined record of, I think, their last 5 opponents is something like 27-4, and if you add Florida State this week to the max, that's now 33-4. So there are some pretty decent teams in the Coastal, and I think that's going to be the thing to watch this year. I think you got the 3 front runners right now are Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and Duke. I think that's the 3 it ends up ultimately coming down to. Obviously, Georgia Tech is out of it at this point and probably mathematically eliminated. Virginia is not getting back into it. And then you've got Miami. Miami's got the talent, and they've got pieces there, but I think that they're not far from entering full meltdown mode. And with the whole Al Golden situation, I don't see that ending favorably for them. And then you got Virginia Tech, which has all this talent on defense, and they've been missing their quarterback for a while, but you never know with them. Honestly, I think the 2 front runners for me in the division right now are North Carolina and Pittsburgh. I think that might come down to the head-to-head between those 2 teams, and it really becomes a bit of a immovable object meets the irresistible force. With the Pittsburgh defense and the North Carolina offense. At that point, you've got Pittsburgh's got a pretty average offense. North Carolina's got a pretty average defense. So I think that would be a really interesting matchup, and that might decide the division this year. But of course, you've got Duke hanging out there, right there, just the 1 loss, and then Virginia Tech and Miami as well hanging around. So you never know what might happen. But as far as who the front runner are and who my favorite is, I think it's North Carolina and Pittsburgh right now.
You're watching or listening to ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Joey Weaver from the Rumble Seat and Dan Rubin from BC Interruption, 2 of our mainstays. So, guys, before we run down the games and get your picks coming up here in Week 8, 0-4 Georgia Tech, 0-3 Boston College. I want to grind down these programs right now and hear from you in regards to whether it's as bad as it looks. So, Joey, we'll stay with you. Georgia Tech 0-4. You just alluded to the kind of competition they've had to face. Should people be jumping off bridges in Atlanta? Is it really that bad? Do you expect this team to bounce back next year?
That question changes if you're asking, are people jumping off bridges in Atlanta? Because they maybe are a little bit prematurely, but should they be? No, they should not be. You look at the way that they've lost these games, and I wrote an article about this last week about how prior to the Pittsburgh game, you could change 5 plays across the Duke and North Carolina game, and maybe not even that much, and Georgia Tech would have a winning record right now. It's been that close. They gave up 2 special teams touchdowns to Duke. That cost them a game that they lost by 2 touchdowns. Against North Carolina, they dropped a pick 6, that would have completely changed the course of the game and derailed things. They lost their best defensive player on a very questionable ejection. So there's all these just bizarre things. It's almost like they're paying the piper for all the unwarranted success they had last year or something. It's been very frustrating that they're that close. And then they lose against Pittsburgh this weekend. The kicker apparently hasn't hit like more than 44 yards all year, and he goes out and kicks a 56-yard school record field goal to win the game. And so that's really what you're dealing with right now. They're close to winning a lot of these games, and that's maybe what makes it so bad. But at the same time, it's a little bit encouraging to know that it's not just a total dumpster fire of a team and of a program. It's that they just need 1 or 2 more plays to be made, and they're looking at a completely different course of the season right now.
And we both ranked it the toughest schedule in the ACC. I don't think there was any question about it. You alluded to it when you've got to face the 2 heavyweights in the other division, Clemson and Florida State, plus you get Notre Dame, plus at the end of the season you've got Georgia every year. That's a rugged slate to get through, and they still have a few of those hurdles to climb. So Boston College, either the 1 or 2 rated defense, scoring and total defense the entire season, Dan, 0-3 in the ACC despite that defensive prowess, give up 34 points against Clemson. So where's the state of the program? A program that was 2-10 3 years ago, back-to-back bowl games. Steve Adazio has done a tremendous job, but I think we were expecting a bit of a downturn this year before maybe some better times.
Yeah, and I think, if you read our comment section, I could sell tickets right now to the Tobin Bridge in Boston, and they'd be lining up to buy those tickets. I mean, it's been pretty bad. But from a standpoint, from taking a step back and kind of looking at this team, you see mostly 3 things with them. Number 1, they lost almost 11 players on offense alone to injury. You're looking at guys like your quarterback, top 2 running backs, wide receivers who never even made the start of the season. Your wide receivers that you're looking at for Boston College, their best receivers never even set foot on the field this year, and they're at the point where Steve Adazio said, I'm not going to play some of these guys unless I absolutely have to retain their year of eligibility. A guy like Ben Glines missed the first few games due to injury, and now Steve Adazio looks at it and says, I don't want to play him because I don't want to lose the year of eligibility. Offensive line, they've started rotating in some younger guys. It was a mess at the beginning of the year. It started to improve. They're starting to gel a little bit. They got back Miles Willis this week. Things are starting to improve after they really took a downturn and they had to go into reconstruction mode in the middle of a season against tough opponents like Florida State, like Duke, like Clemson. Even Wake Forest defensively is a good team. So people tend to sell that short because of the construction that he did and the way he piecemealed the last 2 years with a bunch of older guys. Number 1, I think that you got to look at that, the injuries, the youth, the inexperience, all of it coming together. It's a perfect storm to make it look a lot worse and have them perform a lot worse than they are. Number 2, like I said, they've taken strides forward, and this has always been a multi-year process with Boston College. We knew there were going to be setbacks this year. All you had to do is go back and read some of Steve Adazio's press conferences from last year, and he foresaw that they were going to run into some problems this year. He was very open about it. People tend to glaze over it. They say, oh, yeah, we're going to run into problems. We're still going to beat teams. I think they underestimated how hard it is to build a program in the ACC when you have to go in year 3 from the ground up with all your guys. And I think the third thing that people are overlooking, and one of the things that I started to take a look at, is Temple. Steve Adazio's recruits at Temple are now juniors and seniors, and they're undefeated. Now, yes, Temple does play in a weaker conference in the ACC, arguably, I think when you look at that league, you're not saying that they're very weak given the way that they've played this year, but they're a Group of 5 conference. When you look at the way Temple's played and the fact that their 3 best offensive weapons are a junior, and a senior, those are Steve Adazio recruits. They have to mature. They have to get better. You're looking at a bunch of 18, 19-year-old freshmen and sophomores and saying, well, he can't recruit. These guys are terrible. Maybe this year they're going up against defenses that are seasoned. Maybe they're going up against players that are just a lot better than they are. But you can't amount to the next 3 years without saying this year's been tough, but the growth is still there, and it's still a multi-year process. So, end of the day, I still have faith that in a couple of years, Boston College can challenge the top of the ACC in the Atlantic Division. I do see this team going in the right direction, but it's really hard to find it this year, and you kind of have to go with some blind faith that 2019 and 2018 and 2017 are not going to look anything like 2015.
And on a side note with Temple, this is kind of crazy. Temple actually was named by ABC as the 8 o'clock full national game against Notre Dame. So Notre Dame at Temple, that is going to be the full national. It's got to be the first time Temple's ever played a full national game on one of the major networks. Got to be. All right, guys, we got a Week 8 coming up here, and I just surveyed the games. This is the first time that the entire ACC, all 14 teams, are playing each other, full 7 conference games. We've got 2 kind of dogs, sorry, Dan, in regards to no impact on the division race, or unless all hell breaks loose. Boston College at Louisville with 0-4 against 1-2, and, of course, NC State and Wake Forest 0-2 and 1-3. You guys ready to dive in?
Why not?
All right, here we go. And so we'll stay with the aforementioned North Carolina State Wolfpack. Should be in good shape for a bowl game at 4-2, but they played themselves out of the division race at 0-2. They go to Wake Forest to take on the Demon Deacons, who are coming in at 1-3. Slim shot to get to postseason play at 3-4. What do you got, Dan?
You know, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm actually going to pick Wake Forest. I think NC State is a paper 500. I think Wake Forest is, having watched them, their defense is good. Their offense ran into a really good defense in that game. I think Wake Forest has some tools to put together a season that is improved from last year, and I think they're always capable of taking on somebody and beating them. So I'm going to pick Wake Forest. And I'm gonna make that my bold prediction, and I'm gonna take them with a lot of confidence. I really think they're gonna host and they're gonna hold serve against NC State.
All right, high confidence pick out of Dan on Wake at home against NC State. What do you think on this one, Joey?
You know, I was looking at the slate for this weekend, and this is one of the games that was surprisingly, and maybe this is kind of telling about where I'm at as a football fan, it was one of the more intriguing ones of the weekend. And I'll tell you why is because I think Wake Forest is quite a bit better than I think Wake Forest is a little bit better than people thought they were going to be. And 4 games into the season, people were kind of clamoring over why is NC State not getting any more attention at 4-0 and they're blowing people out. Then they enter conference play, they lose 2 in a row, they scored 13 points in both games, albeit against pretty good defenses in Louisville and Virginia Tech. But then again, they're going to play a good defense in Winston-Salem against Wake Forest. So I think this is going to be a sneaky kind of telling game about where NC State is at, and I'm kind of tempted to take Wake Forest along with Dan. I saw some stat that apparently NC State hasn't won in Winston-Salem since like 1991 or something ridiculous like that. I'm gonna take NC State, but I do not feel good about it at all.
Okay. I will save my picks. Nobody wants to hear from me. You guys are the ACC experts. So we got Boston College going to Louisville. Does BC break through here, Dan?
Nope. But I think they win if they're going to win, but they're not going to win with a lot of points. Jeff Smith is at least stabilizing the quarterback position. Steve Adazio is rolling with him. He's got a handle. He's got an arm. As he improves, I think this offense will start to develop a little bit more, and I think they do have the possibility of putting up points. They put up 17 against Clemson. That said, I don't see them beating Louisville, even though I think I just said that I did. I don't really see them winning this game. I'm going to take Louisville, but I see this team improving, and I see everyone, again, looking at them and saying that there are problems, this team is not going to win. But I'm holding on for later in the year. There's the Virginia Tech game coming up. There's NC State. Take the bowl berth off the table, but they're going to make waves down the stretch. It's just not going to happen this week.
All right, Joey, Louisville, you know a lot about this football team. I liked what I saw despite the issues against Florida State. They've got the quarterback. I think he's actually a more polished quarterback than people give him credit for. They see all the athleticism and just assume he can't throw the ball, but he can sling it, and he doesn't make really stupid decisions most of the time for being a freshman quarterback. They got freshman wide receivers. They're going to be good in the next year or so and could make life difficult on some contenders. So we got Louisville hosting in BC.
Yeah, it's kind of strange to think that we're in year 2 of a Bobby Petrino coach team, and the offense is still quite a bit of a mess at times. But at the same time, you're right that Jackson is kind of coming around. He's a great athlete. He's got to get some better understanding of the system and what's required of him. I think in this game in particular, the defense is going to be good enough to continue limiting a Boston College offense that's really struggled for most of the year, as Dan kind of pointed out. I don't see this being a high-scoring win. I think this is something maybe in the range of like 17-6 or something like that. You know, it's pretty low scoring. But I do think Louisville gets it done at home against a pretty anemic Boston College offense.
Okay, guys, the rest of the games count. They are serious for division consideration. We got Clemson going to Miami, pretty marquee matchup here. Tigers, you guys are both impressed with them. I am as well. I think that they may go undefeated. They go to Miami to take on the Canes. What do you say, Joey?
Yep, I got Clemson. Clemson is in my mind, is the best team in the ACC right now, and I think that they're a playoff team nationally. They're a pretty complete team. Deshaun Watson is staying healthy, doing well. They're kind of figuring some things out on the perimeters without Mike Williams there. They've got Ray McLeod, true freshman that's coming in. He's got a lot of athleticism that's doing well. And that defense is reloaded in like an unbelievable way from all the guys that they lost last year. So give me Clemson in this one, and early calling my shot here is that they're a playoff team at the end of the year.
Yeah, Brad Kaya, for as good as he is, he's not that mobile. He can move within the pocket, but he's not dynamic, and that's the type of quarterback that they need, because from what I've seen of the Miami offensive line, it could be a long night or afternoon for Brad Kaya against that Clemson front four. Dan, what do you say for Clemson going for 7-0 at Miami?
Well, before the season, this was going to be the game that we all kind of wanted to see the two best quarterbacks in the ACC. I still think it's the two best quarterbacks in the ACC, but it boils down to the fact the offensive line at Miami is just really bad, and that's not a good place to be against Clemson. I think Clemson goes down there, and in my Lee Corso-like pick, I'm going to pick them by 7 safeties, 14 points. Clemson's going to win that game.
7 safeties. I can add that. You don't have to help us out, Dan. All right, it's that Pitt Panther team. Jim, unfortunately, can't get back on with us on the line here, but Pitt is a 57-yard field goal away from possibly being 6-0. Nonetheless, 2-0 in the ACC, going to Syracuse to take on the Orange, who have eked out 3 wins, so they still have some hopes of postseason play. So what do you say on this one, Dan, with Syracuse hosting Pitt?
I can't wait for this in basketball season. No, I'm taking Pittsburgh to go up to the Dome and win that one. I think this is one of those games where if Pittsburgh wants to be a contender, they need to go up there and just take care of business and go home. Don't make it any more interesting than you have to with your games against North Carolina and Notre Dame on the horizon. I think Pittsburgh goes up and just handles Syracuse, makes it easier than they probably should, and or makes it a little tougher than they should in the beginning, and then coast home, come home with a victory.
Joey, this appears to be a pretty ugly game with the Orange hosting the Pitt Panthers.
Yeah, obviously the Carrier Dome, tough place to play, but you got Syracuse coming off of a pretty major letdown, 3 overtime loss on the road to Virginia. With how Pitt's been playing, and Syracuse, they have the ability to keep it interesting. They hosted LSU earlier this year, kept it at a 10-point game, so keep an eye on this one. It's not a 100% sure thing in my mind, but I'm taking Pittsburgh to win this one.
All right, Joey, let's stay with you. North Carolina, they're undefeated, even though we didn't talk much about them. They're 5-1 with that lone loss, a game that they certainly could have won when Marquise Williams threw 3 interceptions on opening night against South Carolina. Virginia comes in at 2-4, obviously had to play that horrible non-conference schedule. Horrible meaning horrible for them, the best non-conference schedule in college football. Cavaliers with the win over Syracuse going to North Carolina.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to pick against North Carolina at this point. Like you said, I mean, they're kind of rolling ever since that initial silly loss to not a very good South Carolina team at all. Give me UNC at home for sure on this one.
What do you got here, Dan? We got Virginia going to North Carolina. Pretty big game for the Tar Heels not to trip up.
Yep, and I'm going to take North Carolina just to handle business and come out of that with a win. Mike London not really helping himself on the hot seat rankings, and this is a game where if Virginia had been better at the beginning of the year, I maybe would have considered taking them, but North Carolina's pumping on all cylinders coming out of this game. Again, this is not a game where they just don't trip up, take care of business.
This next game, a couple of years ago, almost a passing of the torch where Virginia Tech, had nearly dominated the division for a number of years. Duke won a big game against Virginia Tech a couple of years ago en route to the division championship. Duke coming in at 5-1, haven't impressed anyone, but still getting the job done a la Pitt. 2-0 in the conference. Go to Virginia Tech, Joey. What do you say about this one?
Man, at this point, I'm not sold on Duke, and at this rate, I may never be. This is 2 years removed from them going to the conference championship game. They've now beaten my Georgia Tech team 2 years in a row, and I am still not sold on Duke. I think that in that game against Georgia Tech, Georgia Tech lost it a lot more than Duke won it. But that said, they don't make mistakes and everything, but they got to go to Blacksburg and play a Virginia Tech team that's getting Michael Brewer back from injury this weekend. I think that's a tough road place to play in, and with what you got on the Virginia Tech defense, I think that they're able to keep it low scoring. But at home, give me the Hokies to beat an upset Duke and kind of throw another wrench into this whole Coastal Division race.
Yeah, so without seeing the point spreads, I would guess this is the closest point spread because Duke hasn't, again, 5-1, getting the job done, but not been impressive. Vegas doesn't love Duke. They're an underdog most of these games that they've won on the 5 out of the 6. They go to Virginia Tech. Dan, your thoughts about the Hokies getting back Michael Brewer and taking on the Blue Devils?
I think Michael Brewer gives it a totally different dynamic. Which leads me to want to take Virginia Tech, especially at home. But, and this is where I come in with my but on Duke, is that Duke hasn't really beaten anybody outside of Georgia Tech. They haven't really played anybody either. When they played Northwestern, they lost. Virginia Tech hasn't really played anybody either, but they've lost. They lost to Pittsburgh, that's their bet, and they lost to Ohio State, but they have no marquee wins. They lost to East Carolina. They lost to Miami. It's one of those things where both teams really have something to prove in this game. I think Duke is a little bit better right now, so I'm going to take the Blue Devils. I don't think Duke is running the table. I don't think Duke is making it through Miami, North Carolina, and Pittsburgh unscathed, but I'm going to take them to beat Virginia Tech. I think Virginia Tech is going to get much better, though, as the end of the year dawns.
Aside from Clemson, Miami, that could be a big Clemson runaway, but at the same time could be intriguing if Kaya gets time to throw and they've got the athletes to make some plays. It could be intriguing. This one at the beginning of the year looked to be a marquee game with Florida State going to Georgia Tech. I think, again, and Joey alluded to it, Vegas may have a peg on this one because on the surface it looks like Florida State's game, but Georgia Tech only like a 5.5 point underdog. This could be a trap game for the Seminoles, Dan.
Yeah, and I keep waiting for Florida State to really to fall forward. I said it last week in their games and the way that they've played this year. I just don't think Florida State is that good. I think they're good. I just don't think they're that good. When you watch Florida State the last couple of years, you looked at them and you said, wow, this team is awesome. I don't see it with them, and I don't think I think they're vulnerable. I think the right team can come along. I am, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, I'm taking Georgia Tech. Because this is an absolute trap game for Florida State. I think Georgia Tech needs to win this game to salvage some semblance of their season. And at the end of the day, I still think Georgia Tech is good enough to have been. They ran into a string of bad luck. Florida State is one of those things that's just, they're one of those teams that's ready to explode. I don't think they're that good. I was completely unimpressed by them against Boston College. I was unimpressed by them against Wake Forest. And even though they pulled away from Louisville, I was not impressed by them against Miami. Somebody's going to beat these guys. And if it's not Georgia Tech, it's going to be Clemson. But Georgia Tech's still a good team. And record might not show it, but they got something to prove at home, national TV on ESPN2, at night. Things are gonna something weird's gonna happen down there in Atlanta.
And the pure handicapper in me says this: regardless of the matchups, regardless of talking about the teams, we got 7 games here. Sheer probabilities say one of these games go, the favorite's gonna win, the favorite's gonna win. But the sheer numbers tell us every week in college football, if you take 7 games, 2 of them are gonna be upsets. And yeah, 2 are gonna be upsets. All right, Joey, you got your Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets hosting FSU, who has not lost a conference game since when? 2011?
I think that they've won something like 28 straight or something like that. So, yeah. So like Dan was saying, I mean, this is a 7 o'clock game. It's being played under the lights. A couple things you might not know is that this is also Georgia Tech's homecoming game, and it will be played in whiteout conditions. So a lot of stuff going on. Honestly, this reminds me a lot of 2 specific games that I was in attendance for as a student in Georgia Tech's history. One of them was in 2009. Number 19 Georgia Tech upset number 4 and undefeated Virginia Tech on the homecoming game under the lights at night. And it was a great night. It was so much fun. I was spoiled as a young student at Georgia Tech when it came to football. And then 2 years later, 2011, the homecoming game under the lights at night. Unranked Georgia Tech upset number 5 and undefeated Clemson. So this game sets up in a bit of a similar fashion where they are the underdog for the homecoming game at night on national television, this whole thing. I have so much trouble trusting Georgia Tech at this point. I've been let down constantly this year, and I struggle to pick them to win this game. But do not count them out for a second, because like you guys were saying, I mean, they are still a pretty good team, regardless of what the record says. And Florida State, I completely agree that they are due to kind of implode at some point. I'm with you that I don't think that they are the Florida State of a couple of years, the past couple of years we've been seeing. That said, I don't know if I trust Georgia Tech enough to pick them in this game based on what I've seen all year. I think the biggest issue that is sticking out in my mind is Georgia Tech's pass protection. It's been almost non-existent over the entire conference slate, and it's the reason that they can't get anything going in the passing game, and therefore the reason that they've sputtered at times on offense. So I'm going to pick Florida State, but I would highly recommend, if anybody out there is really kind of a betting person and is looking to bet on this game, don't. Don't, because anything might happen. This game sets up fairly well for Georgia Tech, and yet I don't know what to tell you what's going to happen, and so only time will tell. But I'll take Florida State, but I'm not feeling super great about it for multiple reasons, obviously. But
thanks for trying to deter me, Joey. You should have gotten a hold of me a long, long time ago. This is ACC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock with some of the best bloggers in the ACC this week. Joey Weaver from the Rumble Seat, Dan Rubin from BC Interruption. Guys, it's always a good time. Always enjoy the discussion.
Anytime.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. Appreciate it.